Hello and welcome to Women's Biz Podcast. I'm Annie Gibbins, founder and CEO of Women's Biz Global, and I invite you to get comfortable and listen in on candid conversations I have with fascinating women from around the globe. Business leaders, entrepreneurs, humanitarians, athletes, and a whole lot of regular people. Tune in as they let their guard down and open up on aspects of their business and life journey, how they measure success, and what they have learned along the way. These conversations aim to inspire you to embrace opportunities and possibilities beyond the limits of your imagination. Reclaim your power, strength, and vulnerability. Stand in your truth and propel yourself towards the life you dream to live. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Women's Biz Podcast with Annie Gibbins. I am thrilled to be joining you this week with a very special guest. Her name is Kristi Spencer. She's the founder of The Polite Company, where she imparts essential etiquette wisdom to professionals, demonstrating how good manners directly translate to good business. This is going to be such a fun conversation. She's had a distinguished career spanning 2 decades in television news, and Kristi's expertise in communication and professionalism are definitely unparalleled in that space. Her commitment to excellence and dedication to helping individuals put their best foot forward make her insights incredibly valuable. So welcome to the program, Kristi.
Thank you for having me.
It's a delight to have you here today, and I'm looking forward to talking about good manners because how easy it is for them to slide. And so this is going to be a really great conversation. I'd love you to share. You've got a background, as I said in your introduction, in journalism and etiquette training. So how did those two, I would be assuming distinct sort of experiences, how did they come together in the work that you're doing?
So, in my former position, I would help anchors polish their image, present themselves. We had a message that we were explaining to people. And so that really does translate to the world of etiquette because we're trying to put our best foot forward. We're trying to make great first impressions. And so those are some of the things that carried over. Although the dynamic in newsroom with deadlines and those kinds of things wasn't always the most civil environment to be in, but it did give me a good background to start my own business.
I'm thinking it would be a pretty hot pressure cooker environment in television, actually, because everything is like on the day changes. I know when I'm trying to get media for things, if it's a slow news day, you're more likely. If things are busy, or if there's a flood, a famine, an accident, something happens with a celebrity, everything just goes out the door. So it must be so easy for everyone's manners to sort of just get a little bit frayed. So I can imagine, actually, now that I'm thinking about it, it does have a lot to do with how you show up despite what's going on around you. So in your opinion, what would be some of the most common etiquette missteps, if you like, that you see, in that kind of world, or definitely in the business world today?
I think so much of it is we lose our self-awareness and we start thinking about ourselves. And when we start doing that, our actions, our words, and our can seem rude to other people. And then when that rudeness causes them to be stressed. And when you're stressed, you have a lack of awareness. And so it's this vicious cycle that if we aren't self aware and we aren't using our manners and really making a point to use our manners, that we can fall into that cycle of disrespecting other people, a lack of communication, and that, of course, self awareness again.
It is when you get focused inwardly, it's so easy to stop yourself from thinking, well, how are other people portraying me? So what tips do you have, if you like, just to, how do people who have kind of lost a little bit of focus on, well, how am I showing up? What are other people sort of seeing of me? What little top tips do you have to help them, avoid those issues and really start enhancing their professional image?
I think I encourage people to do an image inventory. And that's one thing to look at yourself online because that's where you're going to meet people first. Look at your social media, look at your LinkedIn profiles, and see how you're showing up because that's the first impression that you're making in many cases. And then take a look at your actual appearance and how are you showing up? Are you dressing the part? Are you dressing appropriately? There is an amount of respect that shows for your position and for other people when you do show up well. And I think that first impression is just everything. And if we just concentrate on that and have the confidence that we know how to make the introduction, we know that we look best in our outfit, all of those things, then you can forget about them and concentrate on the person in front of you and building that relationship with them.
It's always harder to go up than down. I've always found that. I remember when I got my first CEO role, over a decade ago, and the advice was when I, was asking people, what should I do? And I'm thinking they're going to do it more about the role, and they're going, make sure you dress a level up on what everyone else would have in the office. Make sure that you've really sort of a strong presence in that way, because it's easier to tailor it back than if you start at a level. It's harder to go up the ladder. Do you agree with that?
Absolutely. And we tell people that when we're meeting people as well. If you have a question between being informal or formal, go with the formal because it's so much easier to then, like you say, dial it back than it is
Yeah.
to go back and apologize that you got it wrong. And then you're starting that interaction off with an apology, which is not the strongest way to do it.
Definitely not. Now, over COVID, I reckon if you're in the US and I'm in Australia, I think definitely people have let their whole area of personal presentation. I think we spent a lot of time in our leggings and tracksuit pants and bits and pieces over time, and it's taken a while to actually get back into the way we dress or really thinking about how we show up. Has that been a universal problem? Have you noticed that people have really slipped sort of post the pandemic and that we're still creeping up, or is that just my perception over here in Australia?
No, I think you're spot on. No matter where you are, we are more informal now than we ever have been, and we keep becoming less and less formal, which some people lament and they think, "I wish back in the good old days." But what I say is, this is great news because
Mm,
it takes less to stand out now than it ever did before. So when you wear the suit and when you show up on time and when you write the thank you note, that puts you at the top easily. And so be a little bit more formal than you think you might need to be. And I think it would probably serve people pretty well.
That's true, actually. It's actually easier to dazzle people because they're not expecting that now.
Right.
So, which is a sad indictment on society, but that's so true. I think that's a good tip. Just start doing that little bit extra and you will definitely rise above. So, if you've got some examples that you'd be able to share or a case study that you've actually seen the impact that etiquette actually plays on achieving a business goal or really leveling up, where you thought you were in your business to what actually occurred.
Yes, I do personal coaching for especially women, many who are starting a business or they're starting something new, which I've been there. I've started something new at an older age than people might have thought. And so what we really figure out is that lack of confidence. And once you know a few tricks when you know how to enter a room, when you
Mm,
know how to gesture appropriately, when you know some of those techniques of mirroring and active listening, then you really add to that confidence. And that's all we're really doing with manners is we're building confidence and we're building relationships. It's really not about that list of rules that people often think about of, ticking off. It
yeah.
really is about I have an interaction in front of me. I can either make them feel good or I can make them feel bad. How do I
Mhm.
make them feel good? And sometimes that's even when we're delivering difficult news. And so it is nice to see people kind of walk through that step and gain that confidence to be able
Mm.
to present themselves in their new role.
I love that. And my perspective is that you should always how you're showing up is actually for the people that you're interacting with. It's not necessarily for yourself. So a lot of the coaching is getting yourself to a position that you are so self-aware that you are showing up in a way that you're imagining, how is this being received? As a keynote speaker, I'm often thinking, telling people it's not actually about me on the stage. It's actually about how the audience is receiving it, who I'm speaking to in that audience. Are they connecting with me? And so I'm feeling that sort of same situation is happening here in the work that you're doing. It's coaching people on how to actually be so self-aware that when they're showing up, they're sort of got that extra edge, that they're doing some intentional actions because it's going to make that person feel more comfortable, secure with them, and so forth. So I'd love you to share then a little bit about in the high pressure areas, right? We'll go back to that TV scenario that we were talking at the beginning, and you're coaching individuals to maintain that grace and professionalism, even when they're facing really challenging and stressful circumstances. So how do you actually go about that? And how hard is that for people to get that self-awareness and that training to really sort of shift that gear into that next level of consciousness and ability to be able to show up in a different way?
Well, the first thing that we want to tell people is to think about your actions. And sometimes, many times, when we say, why'd you do that? And you go, I don't know, I wasn't thinking. So that can lead to a lot of problems. So even if you feel rushed, even if you feel like it's a deadline and it has to happen, take a moment, pause, and think about your actions. And then you want to decide which one you're going to go with. And then you want to figure out how to deliver that one in the best possible way. And if that's having a difficult conversation with somebody, if that's having to, tell somebody that they're not maybe measuring up in a way, or making those decisions, it's really not that you make that decision. It's how you carry through with that.
Mhm.
And then I think you always want to do everything with sincerity and honesty, because that's how we connect with people. If people don't view you as sincere and honest, they are not going to trust you. They're not going to want to work for you. They're not going to want to do business with you. So really following whatever action you take, you pick the one that's going to build the relationship, and you do it sincerely. I think if people can follow those 3 steps, that it will be helpful and kind of hard to mess up.
It is a bit hard. It sounds very simple, but you know what? It is challenging when you get into patterns of behavior, or you're in a work environment that you just feel is too difficult. Sometimes people have actually given up on that. People are too challenging. They won't, you feel like you can't have a reset. But that's exactly what you do through your business, that you coach people to do that. Do you have a scenario of someone that you've coached that they were approaching something one way, and then because of that training, those simple steps where you say, you shouldn't be able to muck it up, they actually then were able to approach their work environment in a different way?
So I teach a course called Empowering Etiquette, and that's how to decline invitations, disagree, handle interruptions, kind of all of those bumps in the road
Mm.
that make us a little bit nervous at work. And what I have found is, in teaching that to especially young women, is that they understand that we can be polite and we can be courteous, but that in no way means that we're a pushover. It's
Mhm.
using those tools to be able to politely and respectfully ask for what we want and how we want it and when we want it. But the
Yeah.
key is that we do that politely. And maybe it's we're declining a request, which is hard for us. But when I teach this, I see the light bulbs go off, because people sometimes view being polite as a weakness as opposed to a strength. And I think it's very much a strength to be able to handle situations, and even when they're difficult, to be able to still come out on the other side with that relationship intact or even strengthened.
Mm. That is so true, and I'm sure this is Women's Biz podcast, so it's more likely women who are listening in. And I tell you what, ladies, we do have this problem. I'm happy to speak on behalf of myself and for many, many, many people that I've coached, that we too easily sort of feel like we have to accept something or say yes to something that we didn't want to, and then sort of like then we get overwhelmed and just overly busy or self-sacrifice, and there's really negative responses to that. And what you actually just said there, Kristi, is so true, that you sort of think, oh well, if I'm more assertive in this way, people will think I'm aggressive or unkind or not nice. And we're so trained to always be nice and always be pleasing, it can be a really big problem. Whereas, as you said, that sort of training to, in the work environment, if someone asks you to do something and you're already, fully booked, or you don't have capacity, is that the sort of thing that you're coaching people, instead of saying, oh yeah, sure, I'll do that for you? So like, thank you so much for offering, but unfortunately I'm fully booked at the moment. I'll let you know when, if that changes. Things like that don't make you weak, but they certainly help you keep your boundaries.
Yes, and we don't get ourselves into situations where then we feel like the world is on our shoulders, or we're going to disappoint somebody, or we become a person that's unreliable because we said yes to something and then we say no at the last minute. That's much worse than saying no in the beginning and
Yeah.
drawing that boundary. So I think the yes is a great answer, but so is no. The worst answer is no answer, or an answer that you don't have that sincerity and you don't actually intend to follow through with. So I think that it's just being intentional, thinking about that script before you're going to tell somebody that you can't do something, or you don't have the bandwidth, or whatever the case may be. But think that conversation through in your mind, and then be able to deliver it so that you're unwavering and somebody doesn't feel like they can, make you change your mind or talk you into anything. Really have a firm idea of what you will and you will not do.
Mm. I think this is such a great gold nugget for those listening in now, because this will then just roll out. This principle rolls out through all parts of business, to the point of, high level negotiation to the basic office banter, So, for example, it's better to, when I've been negotiating a business, it's actually better to go and say, unfortunately, that's not going to be able to enter our discussion at the moment due to the focus or the strategy or whatever. It's better to say no up front than to keep people strung along. You're wasting each other's time, energy, resources, and you lose respect by doing that. It's actually better to say, I agree, a clear no, than nothing, or we'll see, when you were never going to be heading in that way. So I think that happens way too much, and it actually is a major negative on business if you approach things that way. So I think the advice here is, just get confident. A lot of this is practice, isn't it? Because it's actually just not going to work for them at that time.
Yeah, so a lot of our group work that we do is we will take subjects and we'll talk about how to disagree, and using I statements and focusing on the facts, and really practice that. Even if the topic is something silly and very low stakes, we're just practicing being able to say your opinion, say your
Mm,
answer, give your reasoning, and then empathize with the other person and listen to them after you've given them that no. And don't waver in your response, but then understand them and say, I understand that you needed this, or I understand that you're in a bind. That empathy will be remembered more than your answer will be.
mm. That is such a good point. It's all about the way you approach it. Even thank you for coming to me about this situation. I really appreciate that you thought of me, or that then that's always a great way to start, even if you unfortunately weren't able to help them, but you still might be able to point them in the right direction, support them at that time, things of that nature. Now, the challenging part of etiquette too is, wondering, well, how is it evolving? We've got these different generations all in the same workplace. I know, and even in my household, we've got the Gen Zs and the millennials, and I'm a Y. My husband's sorry, an X, and my husband's a boomer, and so you've got all these different ways that we've sort of approached etiquette. So, how do you actually see it evolving? Is it a general flavor, or is it that different generations will approach it differently, and that's one of the appreciations that we need to have?
We definitely need to have that appreciation and that awareness for the intergenerational etiquette that we teach. But we make stereotypes, and I hear it from the younger people talk about the boomers, and then people talk about we millennials were one that we beat up for a long time, blamed
Yeah.
everything on them. I think that it's important to not make those stereotypes and really to look at each situation. But we do know in general which generations are more comfortable with face-to-face conversations, which ones are more comfortable with phone conversations, when we're relying on emails or Slack or those kinds of things. So we can try to adjust our means of communication in that way depending on who we're talking to. But I think
Mm,
if you start out with that consideration and respect and honesty, that transcends. Those were the principles of etiquette 100 years ago, and they're
yeah.
still the 3 principles of etiquette today. So I think that if you really concentrate on that, regardless of the mode, I do encourage people to put more emphasis on phone conversations and face-to-face communications. You would think with all the different ways we have to communicate, oh, we'd have absolutely no communication problems, right?
I
But we
know.
know that's not the case. And so I think it is so important. Do not underestimate the power of a face-to-face or an over-the-phone conversation. So much gets lost in translation in an email or text. That person gets to narrate that text depending on their mood, not depending on how we wrote it. And so I really do put an emphasis on try that face to face. I know for some generations that is tough, but it
Mm.
will serve you so well in your future if you get comfortable having those conversations.
I totally agree with that. And I had that situation even happen this week. I sent a message in Messenger to someone, and she actually took it the wrong way. I got offended by something, and I'm like going, "Wow, how could you get offended by that?" But it's totally right. You could be totally accidental. You've sent it in one tone, one thought in your head. They've got something completely different happening, and it's so easy to misinterpret the written word. Whereas conversations, you can just feel the tone. You can hear someone's breath. You can hear their, the the intonation of their voice. There's so many things happening. I agree that is always super valuable, and I think that's an area that is really missing out in some places. And I like what you said there. Of there are differences in the different the decades, those intergenerational decades, and some of them are really great. Some of those areas we've fought hard for them. Even the gen we've got a Gen Z in our house, and like a lot of it is really strong boundaries, really happy to say no, whatever. And you kind of go, wow, we fought for a lot of that. We wanted stronger boundaries, and then when it comes back, you suddenly go, oh, it's a bit confronting. And I think it's a good thing to actually go, well, that's wonderful that we've evolved in a way that we can be really firm about what we believe, what we will do, what we won't do, and things of that nature. Sometimes could tone it down a little bit and work on those other parts, but also just an appreciation that we are all different. But I think what you said today is that those common 3 strands have always worked, and they always will work, is what you're saying.
Yes, it etiquette evolves, but the principles of it really haven't changed.
Hmm. Fantastic. So, for those of you listening in, think about that in your day-to-day business. I'd love you to, in the chat on this podcast, really give us some feedback on, go into work today and start thinking about the conversations that you're having, how you're dressing, how you're portraying yourself. It's not that we're saying be fake. We actually want you to show up authentically as you. We want you to be more of you. I'm sure you'd agree with me there, Kristi. So more of you with your authenticity, but also be thinking, am I showing up in a way that I'm also really reflecting on how every single part of that communication, which is verbal and a lot of it non-verbal, is actually getting portrayed in the workplace. And if you need some help with that, definitely reach back out. We would love to support you in that moving forward. Thank you so much for being on the show today, Kristi. It's been a really engaging, interesting conversation. I've loved it. It's an important one that we seriously have never spoken about on Women's Biz podcast. And I think it's a really important one because we're all just out doing our own thing, showing up in our own way. And it's very, very easy to lose sight of, how, what our brand is. Our brand is what everyone else is saying behind our back. And so it's an important time to sort of probably pick that up from Jeff Bezos said that one. And it's a really great way to actually think of how we are showing up with our etiquette and our manners today. So thanks, Kristi.
Thank you so much for having me on.
Thanks so much for tuning in to this episode of Women's Biz Podcast. I'm Annie Gibbins, founder and CEO of Women's Biz Global. And if you would like to fast track your future success, pop on over to womensbizglobal.com, where you can find out how our coaching, media and publishing opportunities are helping women just like you to become and be seen as the trusted authorities in their niche. Inquire today and start reining in the abundance you desire.